There is a lot of talk about a possible upcoming Russian summer offensive, and in some places it's described in rather alarmist terms, like the Ukrainian front line is going to collapse and we're going to see a new Russian march on Kiev. So in this video, I want to talk about the perspective of a Russian summer offensive and what that might mean. And it's also just been a really long time since I made a video on the frontline situation in general, so it's also a good opportunity to do that. So let's talk about it. I think many people in the West have an image of the front line as being more static than it actually is. There is this image of trench warfare and that it has turned into a kind of stalemate. And to some extent, that is true. The front line is not changing very quickly, but it's also true that generally we are in a phase of the war where Russia has the initiative and they do have some momentum. Every day they make some small gains, moving ahead, like one field there, one tree line there, and sometimes even taking control of small villages. And in themselves, these are not big gains. You will have to zoom in closely to see them on a map, but over time it adds up. So here are two maps to show this. These are maps from deepstatemap.live. One is from January 1st, and the other one is from now. So this shows how much the front line has changed just this year, and so that's over the last 3 months or so. And obviously, the Ukrainian defenses have not collapsed. They are holding out pretty well, but the direction is clear. Russia is taking territory, and they have a feeling of momentum. There are several reasons for this. One of them is that Russia has been better at generating manpower than many people had expected. I think definitely better than the Ukrainian generals had expected, and also better than I personally thought they would be able to. So they have been able to sustain a pretty big offensive without having another round of mobilization. I made a video about that if you're interested in the Russian manpower situation. But there is also the issue of ammunition availability for Ukraine. I think if we go back half a year, then pretty much no one had expected that the United States would not be providing ammunition anymore. So it has changed the power balance on the front line quite dramatically that the US Congress has not approved an assistance package for Ukraine. And it was something that it was very difficult for Ukraine to plan for because nobody had seen it coming. So I think those are probably the two most important reasons for why Russia has momentum right now. They are going to try to capitalize that, and that's why we have this discussion about a Russian summer offensive. Right now there is the mud season in Ukraine. It's this time in early spring where there is so much mud everywhere that the terrain is not really suitable for big military operations. There was a big Russian push in the winter, and that culminated in February when they took the city of Avdiivka. But right now there is a slightly lower intensity. Russia is still pushing, and they're still taking territory, but it's not quite as intensive. But there is a lot of speculation that when the weather gets better, then maybe in the end of May or in June, then we're going to see another big Russian offensive. So if we look at where that offensive might take place, then there are different possibilities. One possibility that is discussed is an attack from the south. This is an area where if Russia is successful here, then they can really improve their own situation in regard to securing the logistical lines to Crimea, and they can threaten the city of Zaporizhzhia. But I think a big offensive push from the south is probably less likely because it will be difficult to sustain such an operation logistically. There are so long lines of communication, it will be really difficult to bring all the supplies to the area that are necessary for that offensive. Another possibility that has been discussed a lot is an attack from the north. This is the area where the front line today goes along the internationally recognized border between Ukraine and Russia. So this could be, for example, an attack from the Belgorod region toward the city of Kharkiv. I also think this vector of attack is probably less likely. And the reason for that is that they would essentially have to build up an entire new army to have any chance of success, like maybe 100,000 new troops with equipment. And I don't see them having the resources to do that without taking them from somewhere else on the front line where, I don't think there is anywhere on the front line really where Russia would be willing to ease the pressure at this point and redirect resources away from that. So that means that the most likely place for the summer offensive is in the east. So basically, it's the same place where the winter offensive was. It's a pretty long stretch from the Kharkiv, Luhansk region in the north to the Donetsk region in the south. Over the winter, we've seen Russia pushing pretty much along the entire front line in this area. And in fact, they're still doing that. And I think the most likely scenario is that we're going to see that continue, and that when we get into the summer, it might intensify. Because the summer is, after all, the best season for military offensives in Ukraine. That is when the weather is suitable for that and when the soil is good for maneuvers. This is where we have seen some of the alarming headlines in especially the Western media, because we are in a situation where Russia has the momentum at this moment, and they are pushing hard, and Ukraine has really big problems with ammunition shortages, and that obviously leads to discussions about how bad could it get if Russia can turn up the heat even more when we get to the summer. And we also had Zelensky recently giving an interview to an American TV station where he said that if the United States Congress does not pass that assistance package and sends more ammunition to Ukraine, then they will be forced to step backwards. And some people have been talking about this as if there is a risk of a dramatic collapse of the front line and that we will suddenly see Russia making another drive on Kiev. But I think that's probably a wrong picture. And I will mention a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that we have not yet seen Russia launch another wave of mobilization. Many people had expected that this would happen now that the presidential election is over, but it hasn't happened yet. And now they have started the regular spring conscription call-up, and that will basically mean that the Russian recruitment offices, they will be busy for the next couple of months just dealing with the conscripts. And when they had the big wave of mobilization in the autumn of 2022, then they postponed the conscription cycle because the recruitment offices, they were just not able to do both at the same time. And I think if they wanted to do mobilization at this point, then they would have done the same. But they haven't. So I think we are unlikely to see another round of mobilization until maybe June at the earliest. And that means that Russia won't have these soldiers available for the summer offensive because it takes some time from the decision is made to recruit people and until they are ready on the front line. It will take maybe some months, maybe 3-4 months before you really see the effect. So we're getting to the point where it's beginning to be too late for Russia to mobilize soldiers for a summer offensive. They may still have some reserves up their sleeves, but I don't think they're going to be able to increase the number of soldiers dramatically. And the other reason why the idea of a collapse of the front line gives a wrong picture is that I think we've actually come to a point in the war where neither side is really capable of mechanized maneuver warfare. And that is warfare where you make breakthroughs with vehicles, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and then you move quickly, you coordinate that action, and it's difficult. That takes a lot of training. You need vehicles that have the right kind of communications equipment and crews that can use that. And at this point, it really doesn't seem like either side in the war has troops that have that kind of training that is necessary for maneuver warfare. And many of the Russian vehicles are also not really state-of-the-art, top-of-the-line, modern types of armored vehicles, but it's more and more old Soviet equipment that has been taken out of storage and has been brought back into service. And you really need a lot of vehicles to make an actual breakthrough on the front line. It's not enough to just have a few. You need a lot if you want to take advantage of that situation. But the most important reason why this kind of mechanized maneuver warfare is unlikely is that vehicles are just extremely vulnerable on the battlefield as it looks today in Ukraine. There's just so many weapons on the battlefield that can take out a vehicle. And that's everything from mines to man-portable anti-tank weapons and artillery and drones. And right now, especially the drones are really tough on the vehicles. They account for a clear majority of the vehicle destructions. And no matter how severe the Ukrainian shell hunger gets, I don't see them running so low on all these types of weapons that it would make Russian mechanized breakthroughs possible. And what that means is that the maximum speed that Russia can make progress with is actually at the pace that a dismounted soldier can walk. I want to give credit to Philip O'Brien, who pointed this out in his Substack newsletter. It's a really important point that the maximum speed by which the front line can move in either direction right now is limited to how quickly a man can walk. So that just gives an important corrective to sort of have in mind when we see those headlines where they talk about a possible collapse of the front line, that it's not going to look like what we saw in the first weeks of the war, where the Russian army was advancing very quickly in vehicles on Kiev, because the next advance like that is going to be by foot. And the last thing I want to mention is the fact that Ukraine is also preparing for an upcoming Russian summer offensive. They are building these defense lines with trenches and dragon's teeth and those sorts of things. There is also a lot of work going on to solve the problem that Ukraine has with access to ammunition. So we don't know if the U.S. Congress is going to approve the assistance package. That in itself could change the picture very dramatically if they do that. But also the European countries are doing what they can to increase the deliveries to Ukraine. There is the Czech initiative where they have found 1 million artillery shells, and they will start arriving in Ukraine pretty soon. Now Estonia is talking about they've also found some artillery shells that can maybe help. And the European production is also growing in itself. Maybe not as quickly as we would like, but it's happening. So there is a good chance that Ukraine will be more ready for the Russian summer offensive than they were for the winter offensive. So what to make of all this? To be honest, I think it's a little puzzling to look at what the Russians are doing. It seems to me that they expect the current level of pressure to be enough to maintain the momentum and to eventually win the war. Because if they wanted to increase the pressure and take advantage of that moment of opportunity that they have right now, then they would mobilize more soldiers now so that they could use them in the summer. But apparently they don't feel the need to do that. So they are betting on the current level of manning to be enough to maintain momentum. And it also seems that they are betting essentially on the Ukrainian ammunition shortage to continue or to get worse, because if the Czech initiative begins to work or if the U.S. Congress approves the assistance package, then it will become a lot harder for the Russians to make progress on the front line. And it will be hard for them to maintain the momentum if they have not mobilized more resources in the meantime, especially if Ukraine also managed to complete the fortifications. And of course, just because Russia hasn't mobilized more soldiers yet, it doesn't mean that they won't do it later. But in that case, it will be too late for most of the summer offensive. So what is the big picture then? There is a lot of talk about a large Russian summer offensive. And when I look at it, it also seems like the Russians are planning to maybe increase the intensity once we get to the other side of the mud season. But I don't see them making the kinds of preparations that would really be necessary to increase the intensity sort of dramatically. And for that reason, I will say that it looks to me like there are some signs of optimism bias here on the Russian side, that they're betting on everything basically working out really well for themselves and that things won't work out on the Ukrainian side. And of course, optimism bias is not really a good recipe for military success. And I really don't see the signs on the Ukrainian side that there is an imminent collapse around the corner. So I think we're probably going to see the Russians trying to launch a summer offensive, and they may make some progress, but I don't think we should expect that things will suddenly accelerate dramatically and that the front line is going to collapse. Okay, I will end it here. If you found the video helpful or informative, then please give it a like. And also remember to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon to get notifications when I upload new videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again next time.